Man, the news today, it's just heavy. Another really tough day in the Gaza-Israel conflict, and now Hezbollah is involved. So we're doing this deep dive, going through a ton of news articles from really reliable sources, all to help make sense of what's going on, why it matters, and what it all means.
Yeah, it's definitely a tangled web, but I think by looking at each thread, we can at least start to untangle it a bit, try to get a grip on it all.
Exactly. So let's start in Gaza, where the human cost of this whole thing is just, well, it's really hitting home. The reports are heartbreaking, families driven from their homes, the healthcare system on the verge of collapse, and the casualties. It's just awful.
Absolutely. We are seeing a full-blown humanitarian crisis unfold right before our eyes, and this is in a place in Gaza that was already facing immense challenges even before this.
One of the articles I was reading, it talked about a school bombing in Gaza City, 7 people killed, including, I think it was a high-ranking Hamas official.
Right.
Just like that, 7 lives gone. And then there was this quote, it really got to me, from a woman named Aya, who's taking shelter in Deir al-Balah. She talked about how when it rains even a little, their tents, they basically become swimming pools. 10 minutes of rain were enough to sink the tents, she said. We don't want new tents. We want the war to end.
Yeah. It's those personal stories, they really bring it home, remind us that this isn't just about headlines and numbers. Aya's words, they just really highlight the desperation of the situation there. There are almost 2.3 million people displaced within Gaza right now, just struggling to survive, to meet their basic needs under these just impossible conditions.
It's so easy to get lost in the headlines, the casualty figures, but then you read something like Aya's story, and it just stops you in your tracks. You can't look away. And then there's this whole other issue of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt.
Right, the Rafah crossing, it's so much more than just a border. It's a lifeline for Gaza.
Yeah.
It's the main route for people and supplies, aid, everything, trying to get in or out.
Yeah.
And historically, controlling Rafah, it's always been a huge point of conflict between Israel and Hamas, a major sticking point in any talk of a ceasefire, always.
Yeah, the articles mention that Israel wants to keep control there, citing security concerns, but you have to imagine, for those trapped inside Gaza, it probably feels like just another wall closing in. What is it about Rafah that makes it so strategically important?
Well, Rafah's location is really what makes it so important. I mean, it's the only way in or out of Gaza that completely bypasses Israel, right? So that makes it a potential route for everything, supplies, aid, even weapons. And Israel sees controlling that as, essential for their security. But for Palestinians, it's a huge restriction on their freedom, their movement, their access to, everything. And the thing is, this crisis, it's not just contained to Gaza anymore. This is what's really scary. Yeah. We're seeing this whole thing escalate on the Israel-Lebanon border too now, with Hezbollah jumping right into the middle of it all.
Right. It's like everything just went into overdrive. I mean, one minute we're talking about border skirmishes, the next it's airstrikes and rockets flying.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with Hezbollah?
They're saying they'll keep fighting until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. But, I mean, it can't be as simple as just showing up for a friend, right?
Right.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's way more complicated than that. Hezbollah, they're a powerful group backed by Iran, and they definitely have skin in the game here. On the surface, yeah, they're presenting themselves as defenders of the Palestinian cause, and that resonates. It really taps into a lot of anger towards Israel. But this also, it serves Hezbollah's own interests.
So it's strategic. They're trying to boost their own power and influence through this.
Exactly. By getting involved in this conflict, Hezbollah, they're aiming to solidify their position, not just within Lebanon, but across the whole region. They want to, 1, prevent Israel from taking any direct action against them, and 2, just project this image of strength. And this is where things could really spiral.
Yeah, because now we've got the articles mentioning the Islamic resistance in Iraq. They're launching missiles and drone attacks on Israel, too, saying they're supporting Hezbollah. It's I don't know, this chain reaction that just keeps getting worse.
That's the biggest fear, honestly, this pulling in other regional players. Because if that happens, it could turn an already awful situation, a catastrophe really, into a full-blown war across the whole region.
Yeah.
And the consequences would be devastating. And here's the really concerning part. The UN has explicitly said, that there's no military solution to this conflict. So where does that leave us? Where do we even go from here?
So if the UN is saying there's no military solution, what are they hoping for? What's being done, on a global level to actually stop this, to make a difference?
Well, there's a ton of pressure on the international community to step in, but it's so complicated. No easy answers here. We're seeing pretty much everyone condemn the violence, which is a start, I guess. But
Yeah.
turning that condemnation into actual action, that's the real challenge.
It's like the whole world can agree that this is bad, but no one can agree on how to fix it. One of the articles mentioned the UK's foreign minister, right? They're really concerned and thinking about more sanctions against Israeli settlers, those living in the West Bank, which, if I'm remembering right, that's territory Israel's controlled since way back in '67.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually a really important development. It suggests, at least to me, that there's a growing willingness to put some teeth behind the talk, to take concrete steps, even if it means targeting a close ally like Israel. The idea behind sanctions is to pressure governments into changing their policies, but they can be tough, It's a blunt instrument, and how effective they actually are, well, that's always up for debate.
And it feels like sanctions, they take time to work, and time is something that, well, Gaza just doesn't have right now. Are there any other options on the table? What about, those back-channel discussions you mentioned earlier? Are those still happening?
Oh, absolutely. We have to remember, public statements, those are just one piece of the puzzle. It's practically guaranteed that there are talks going on behind the scenes, diplomatic channels, all that are happening out of the public eye, away from the cameras.
So there's hope, then, that some progress could be made through those channels.
There's always hope. Diplomacy, it's a long game, It takes patience, persistence, and a real willingness to find common ground, to compromise. The path to peace, it might be fragile, but it often lies in those quiet efforts, the ones we don't see.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground in this deep dive today. The heartbreaking situation in Gaza, Hezbollah's involvement, all the ins and outs of international diplomacy. It's a lot to take in, and I think it'd be easy to just feel overwhelmed by all of it, by the sheer scale of this conflict.
It's true. It's heavy stuff, and it's never simple. But I think if we try to understand the history here, the motivations of everyone involved, the challenges, the potential pitfalls, it can help us make a little more sense of it all.
So where do we go from here? If the UN is right and a military solution isn't an option, what does that mean for everyone involved? What are the paths towards, a lasting peace? It's definitely a question with no easy answers, but it's one worth thinking about, especially as this conflict continues, and the costs, the human costs, just keep adding up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Don't stop asking the tough questions, and remember, even in the middle of all this, there's always hope for a better tomorrow. We'll see you next time.